Code is going to take in students from user input along with their grades and sorts them in order to create groups of a desired size. This program can be used so that no one ever feels like they're doing all of the work in a group project again. We need to include IOStream in order to use the console. We're going to be inputting and manipulating strings, so we need to include string. And we are going to be using vectors to keep track of our students, so we need to include vector. I'm going to be showing you how to use a header file, and I named it header.h, so we need to include that too. We're going to start out with our main function. In order to keep track of all the students in the classroom, I'm going to make a vector of student pointers. This will allow us to effectively keep track of all of the students that were inputted through the console. I'm going to use a do-while loop in order to take input from the console, so we'll need the while condition to be y for yes. So I'll initialize a character var continue to be y. We're going to start out with a string n and a character g in order to take in the student's name and their grade. Now that we have their grade, we can use the dot pushback method of the vector on our classroom vector in order to add that student to the vector. Notice how we initialize the student with our name and grade, and also use the new command since we are dealing with pointers. This will create a student object, and we are simply keeping track of the pointers. Now we give the user a chance to continue on with entering names in the program. This will keep looping until we have collected all of the students for our program. We are going to allow a dynamic amount of people per group to be formed, so we'll need an integer to keep track of the amount. Once we take in the amount of students the user wants in a group, we are ready to sort our students and group them up. I'm going to make a vector of group pointers called groups in order to keep track of all of the groups that we will form. In order to group the students by approximate grade, we'll have to sort the students first. I have several for loops that will group the students according to their grade. We'll construct the first for loop and increment the iterator up to the size of the classroom. This will go through every student that we have in our classroom vector, and then I'm using the arrow getGPA method in order to return the student's grade. Since we are using student pointers in our classroom vector, I had to use the arrow notation. Then I have an if statement that ensures that the student's grade is the desired one. Then I will push back that student into our new vector, sorted classroom. I have done this for loop for each possible grade. The last thing we have to do in our main function is actually make the groups. I am going to use a for loop in order to loop through the classroom the amount of times that we need. Since the amount of groups depends on the amount of students per group, I divided the size of the classroom by the amount that we need per group. Using a nested for loop, I pushed a new group into the groups vector. Then I will add 3 students to that group that we just pushed back into the groups vector. We are adding the student from the sorted classroom vector, and I am using the index of I times amount plus j in order to get the right index for the sorted classroom. Now we can console out the number of groups that we have and print them out. I am using a for loop iterate through all of the groups and see out the group number, as well as another for loop to see out the students in that group. Since we use group objects in order to group our students together, we can expand on this code and sort them in other ways, as well as manipulate the students in each group easier. Now in the header.h file, we will include strings and vectors. We will need 2 classes, the student class and the group class. The student class needs the default constructor as well as the constructor we will be using, which takes in the name and the student's GPA. We will need a function that returns the student's GPA and one that prints the names out. Therefore, we will need variables name and GPA in order to store the student's info. The group class will need a constructor that initializes the amount of students in the group, and an add student method. We will also need a vector of students and the number in the group variable. Moving on to the header.cpp, we create the default constructor for the student and leave it blank. We initialize the student's name to be the one taken in by the function, as well as the GPA. Printing the student's name will simply see out the student's name followed by an end line, and the getGPA method will simply return the GPA of the student. So that is all we have to write. In the default constructor for a group, we should initialize the integer num in group to 0 since we do not want an issue to arise with a non-initialized integer. The other constructor will initialize the number of students in the group to whatever was passed through. The add student member function will just push back on the students vector that we declared in the class. That's it. Now, here's a demo of me actually putting in names and grades until I ran out of random names and I decided to have 3 in my group. Ta-da!